Hello, my friends. Welcome back to DreamLearn English. I am so glad you are here today. Take a slow breath, open your mind, and relax your body. Today, we are going on a journey. Not just any journey. We are traveling back in time more than 5,000 years to one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in human history. Today, we are going to learn the story of China. Yes, my friends, China, a land of dragons and emperors, a land of great walls and ancient rivers, a land of warriors and wise men, a land that helped shape the world you live in today. So get comfortable and let this story come to you slowly and naturally. Let us begin. Long, long ago, before there were any cities, before there were any kings, before there were any written words, there were people living near a great river in East Asia. This river was called the Yellow River, or the Huangdi. The water of this river was yellow and brown from all the rich soil it carried. And that soil, that beautiful, dark, soft soil, was perfect for growing food. The people who lived near this river learned to plant seeds. They grew millet and rice. They raised pigs and chickens. They built small villages. They worked together. They traded with each other. They formed families, then communities, then something bigger. Something that would one day become one of the greatest civilizations on Earth. We call this early period the Neolithic Age in China. It happened around 7,000 to 5,000 years ago. These early Chinese people were simple farmers, but they were also very smart. They learned to make pottery, to weave cloth, and to build strong wooden homes. They buried their dead with care, which tells us they believed in life after death. They were not just surviving, they were thinking. They were creating. Then came something important. Around 4,000 years ago, a new kind of society began to form. Leaders appeared. Some leaders were strong, some were wise, some were both. According to ancient Chinese stories, the first great leaders were called the Three Sovereigns and the Five Emperors. These are names like Fuxi, Shang, and the Yellow Emperor Huangdi. These were not exactly real historical people in the way we understand today. They were legendary figures, part history, part myth. But they represent the beginning of Chinese civilization. They represent the first ideas about order, government, and the relationship between human beings and the natural world. The Yellow Emperor Huangdi is especially important. Chinese tradition says he invented writing, medicine, and silk. Whether or not this is completely true, it shows us how deeply the Chinese people valued knowledge, healing, and beauty, even in their oldest stories. Then, around 2,000 years before the birth of Christ, in what historians call roughly 2070 BCE, something happened that changed China forever. The first Chinese dynasty was born. It was called the Zhou Dynasty. A dynasty, my friends, is a series of rulers from the same family. When one emperor died, his son or another family member became the next ruler. China would be ruled by dynasties for thousands of years. This is one of the most important ideas for understanding Chinese history. The Zhou dynasty is still mysterious to historians. We do not have a lot of physical evidence for it, but Chinese historical texts talk about it with great detail. They describe wise kings and foolish kings, floods and heroes, and the long struggle to build a stable civilization. The most famous figure of the Zhou period is a man named Yu the Great. Yu spent 13 years controlling a terrible flood that was destroying his people's farmland. He dug canals and moved mountains of earth to redirect the water. He worked so hard that he did not visit his own home for those 13 years, even when he passed his own front door. His dedication became a symbol for Chinese leaders for thousands of years after him. After the Zhou came the Shang dynasty, from around 1600 to 1046 BCE. This is the first dynasty for which we have solid physical archaeological evidence. We have found their cities, their bronze tools, and most importantly, their writing. The Shang people wrote on animal bones and turtle shells. They would carve questions into the bone, heat it over fire, and read the cracks that formed. They believed the cracks gave them answers from the spirit world. These writings are called oracle bones, and they tell us incredible things about Shang society, their fears, their prayers, their kings, and their daily lives. The Shang were also master craftsmen. Their bronze work was extraordinary. They created beautiful ritual vessels, large bronze cups and pots used in ceremonies to honor their ancestors. In Chinese culture, honoring your ancestors is deeply important. The Shang believed their dead relatives could influence the world of the living, so they made offerings, they prayed, they showed respect. But the Shang also had a dark side. Archaeological evidence shows they practiced human sacrifice. When a great king died, servants and soldiers were sometimes killed and buried with him to serve him in the afterlife. This was a brutal practice, but it was not unusual for ancient civilizations around the world at this time. Then came the Zhou dynasty, which began around 1046 BCE and lasted until 256 BCE, one of the longest dynasties in Chinese history. The Zhou rulers defeated the last Shang king, a man remembered as a cruel tyrant, and took control of the land. The Zhou introduced a powerful idea, the mandate of heaven. This concept said that the gods in heaven gave rulers the right to rule, but only if they ruled justly and wisely. If a ruler became corrupt or cruel, heaven would take away its blessing. Natural disasters, floods, rebellions, these were seen as signs that a ruler had lost the mandate of heaven. This idea became one of the most important political concepts in Chinese history. It justified the overthrow of bad rulers. It also gave new rulers a way to claim legitimacy. The early Zhou period was a time of great culture and order, but as the dynasty aged, central power weakened. Local lords began to take control of their own territories. Eventually, China broke apart into many small competing states. Historians call the later Zhou period the Spring and Autumn period, and then the Warring States period. This was a time of endless battles, shifting alliances, and great suffering. But it was also a time of extraordinary intellectual growth. During this period of chaos and conflict, some of the greatest thinkers in human history appeared. Their ideas were so powerful that they still shape the world today. The most famous of these thinkers was Confucius. Confucius was a man who lived from 551 to 479 BCE. He was born in a small state called Lu, in what is today the Shandong province of eastern China. He was not a rich man, but he was deeply intelligent and deeply concerned about the problems of his world. He asked a simple question: why is there so much violence and suffering? And his answer was also simple but profound: because people have forgotten how to behave properly toward one another. Confucius believed that society should be built on 5 key relationships: ruler and subject, parent and child, husband and wife, older brother and younger brother, and friend and friend. In each relationship, there were duties and responsibilities. If everyone fulfilled their duties with sincerity and respect, society would be peaceful and harmonious. He called this ideal way of behaving Ren, which means kindness or humaneness. He also stressed loyalty, righteousness, and ritual, the proper ways of doing things that give life meaning and order. Confucius spent most of his life traveling from state to state, trying to convince rulers to follow his ideas. Most of them did not listen. He died thinking he had failed. But after his death, his students collected his teachings in a book called the Analects. And over the following centuries, his ideas spread across all of China and then across all of East Asia. Confucianism became the foundation of Chinese society for more than 2,000 years. At the same time, other thinkers were offering different answers to China's problems. Laozi, the founder of Daoism, taught that people should live in harmony with the Tao, the natural force that flows through all things. He said that too much effort, too much force, too much desire, these were the problems. The answer was simplicity, silence, and following the natural way. His ideas were written in a small but beautiful book called the Tao Te Ching. Another school of thought, called legalism, argued that the only way to bring order was through strict laws, harsh punishments, and absolute obedience to the ruler. Legalism believed that human nature was fundamentally selfish, and that only fear of punishment could control people. While this sounds cold, it was extremely effective, as we will soon see. The Warring States period ended in 221 BCE with one of the most dramatic events in Chinese history. A young and brilliant king named Zheng, ruler of the state of Qin, conquered all the other states one by one through military genius, political cunning, and the ruthless application of legalist ideas. And when he had conquered them all, when all of China lay at his feet, he gave himself a new title. He called himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China. For the first time in history, all of China was united under one ruler. Qin Shi Huangdi was only 38 years old. He would reshape the world. The first emperor moved with incredible speed. He standardized the Chinese writing system so that people from different parts of China could all communicate through the same written characters. He standardized weights and measures and the widths of roads and cartwheels so that goods could travel easily across the empire. He standardized the currency. He built a vast network of roads and canals. He burned books that he considered dangerous, books that promoted ideas like Confucianism, which questioned the authority of rulers. He buried scholars alive. He was brilliant. He was visionary. He was also terrifying. And then there is his greatest project. He did not build the Great Wall that tourists visit today, that came later, but he did connect existing walls in northern China into one long defensive barrier to protect against nomadic invaders from the steppes. Hundreds of thousands of workers, soldiers, prisoners, and conscripted farmers built this wall. Many of them died. Their bones, some people say, are buried inside the wall itself. At the same time, far from the northern frontier, thousands of workers were building something else for the emperor, his tomb, an underground palace. And inside this tomb, to guard him in the afterlife, stood thousands of soldiers, not real ones but clay ones. Life-size terracotta warriors, each with a unique face, each armed, each standing in battle formation. The terracotta army was discovered by farmers in 1974 and stunned the entire world. Historians believe there are still thousands of figures that have not yet been excavated. Qin Shi Huangdi was obsessed with immortality. He sent explorers across the seas looking for a legendary island where an immortal medicine was said to exist. He drank mercury-based potions, believing they would make him live forever. Instead, the mercury likely poisoned him and contributed to his death at the age of 49. When he died, his empire was already unstable. His son was a weak ruler. Rebellions broke out everywhere. Within 4 years of the first emperor's death, the Qin dynasty collapsed. Out of the chaos that followed rose one of the greatest dynasties in Chinese history, the Han Dynasty, which lasted from 206 BCE to 220 CE. The Han Dynasty was so important that the Chinese people still call themselves the Han people today. The Han language, the Han culture, the Han way of life. The Han emperors took the administrative structures that the Qin had created, the unified writing system, the roads, the central government, but softened the brutality. They embraced Confucianism as the official philosophy of the state. They created a civil service exam system, where government officials were chosen based on knowledge and ability, not just birth or wealth. This was a revolutionary idea. It meant that a talented man from a poor family could rise to serve the emperor. In theory, at least. The Han Dynasty was also a time of great expansion. The Emperor Wudi, the martial emperor, pushed China's borders westward into Central Asia. He sent a diplomat named Zheng on a famous mission to find allies against the nomadic Xiongnu people who threatened China's northern borders. Zheng traveled for years through lands no Chinese person had ever seen. He came back with strange and wonderful things, grapes, alfalfa, and most importantly, knowledge of new trade routes. Those trade routes became what we call the Silk Road, a network of paths crossing deserts and mountains, connecting China to Central Asia, the Middle East, India, and eventually Rome. Chinese silk, porcelain, and spices traveled west. Glass, horses, gold, and new ideas traveled east. The Silk Road was not just a trade route. It was a highway of culture, religion, and ideas. Buddhism first entered China along the Silk Road during the Han Dynasty. The Han period also saw great achievements in science and technology. The Chinese invented paper during this time, one of the most important inventions in human history. Before paper, writing materials were heavy and expensive. Paper changed everything. Knowledge could be written, copied, and shared. The world of ideas grew faster than ever before. But even the greatest dynasties eventually fall. After 400 years, the Han Dynasty weakened, torn apart by internal power struggles, natural disasters, peasant rebellions, and the growing power of local warlords. By 220 CE, China fractured once again into multiple kingdoms. This period of division would last for nearly 400 years. During this long, difficult time of division, Buddhism grew rapidly throughout China. Buddhist monks came from India. Temples were built. Monasteries were founded. The ideas of suffering, compassion, meditation, and the possibility of enlightenment offered comfort to ordinary people living through centuries of war and uncertainty. Buddhism would become one of the three great traditions of Chinese spiritual life, alongside Confucianism and Daoism. Then China was united again briefly and powerfully under the Sui dynasty, beginning in 581 CE. The Sui emperors undertook massive construction projects, most famously the Grand Canal, a vast waterway connecting northern and southern China. This canal was an engineering miracle. It allowed food, goods, and soldiers to move quickly across the country. But the human cost was enormous. Millions of workers were forced to build it. Many died. The people grew exhausted and angry. After only 37 years, the Sui dynasty fell. What followed was the Tang dynasty, lasting from 618 to 907 CE, widely considered one of the golden ages of Chinese civilization. The Tang capital, Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, was one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. More than 1 million people lived there. Merchants, monks, artists, and diplomats came from across Asia and beyond. Japanese monks came to study Buddhism. Persian traders sold jewels and spices. The city was alive with color, music, poetry, and ideas. Tang China was especially remarkable for its poetry. The Tang period produced two of the greatest poets in Chinese history, Li Bai and Du Fu. Li Bai wrote with wild, joyful abandon about wine, moonlight, friendship, and the beauty of the natural world. Du Fu wrote with compassion and sorrow about war, poverty, and the suffering of ordinary people. Their poems are still read and loved in China today, more than 1,000 years after they were written. The Tang dynasty also saw the development of block printing, an early form of printing where characters were carved into wood and pressed onto paper. This technology would eventually lead, centuries later, to the printing press, another revolution in the spread of knowledge. But the Tang, too, eventually collapsed, weakened by internal rebellions, military defeats, and economic problems. After a period of chaos known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms, China was reunified under the Song dynasty in 960 CE. The Song dynasty is another remarkable chapter in Chinese history. This was a time of extraordinary economic and technological innovation. China under the Song had the world's most sophisticated economy. Paper money was invented. Credit systems were developed. Cities grew large and bustling. The population of China may have reached over 100 million people, at a time when Europe was sparsely populated and still struggling with the aftermath of Rome's fall. The Song also gave the world 3 of the most transformative inventions in history: gunpowder, the compass, and advanced printing technology. Gunpowder had been discovered earlier, but during the Song it was developed into actual weapons: fire arrows, bombs, early guns. The compass allowed ships to navigate by the stars, and eventually to sail across unknown oceans. And printing, now improved and widespread, made books and knowledge available to more people than ever before. But the Song dynasty also lived under constant military pressure from neighboring peoples to the north and west. Eventually, It faced the most devastating military force the world had ever seen: the Mongols. Under Genghis Khan and then his grandson Kublai Khan, the Mongols conquered most of the known world. And in 1279, Kublai Khan completed the conquest of China, establishing the Yuan dynasty. For the first time in Chinese history, the entire country was ruled by foreigners. Kublai Khan was a fascinating ruler. He was a warrior, but he was also genuinely interested in Chinese culture. He maintained many Chinese institutions. He welcomed foreign visitors, including the Venetian traveler Marco Polo, whose descriptions of China astonished Europeans and helped open their eyes to the wealth and sophistication of East Asian civilization. The Yuan dynasty lasted less than a century. A series of famines, floods, epidemics, and rebellions brought it down. A peasant rebel leader, a man who had been a Buddhist monk, then a beggar, then a soldier, rose through the chaos to found a new dynasty. His name was Zhou, and his dynasty was called the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty lasted from 1368 to 1644 and is famous for many things. They rebuilt the Great Wall, the wall that most tourists visit today, into the magnificent stone structure we know. They moved China's capital to Beijing and built the Forbidden City, the enormous imperial palace complex that still stands today. They launched extraordinary naval voyages under the command of Admiral Zheng, a Muslim eunuch from southwest China. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng led 7 massive voyages across Southeast Asia, India, the Persian Gulf, and the coast of East Africa. His ships were enormous, some say larger than anything European sailors had at the time. He brought back exotic animals, diplomatic relationships, and treasures, but after his death, the voyages stopped. China turned inward. This decision to turn away from the sea, to close the borders, to reject foreign contact, would have enormous consequences in the centuries to come. The Ming Dynasty eventually weakened under corruption, peasant rebellions, and pressure from a northern people called the Manchus. In 1644, a rebel army captured Beijing. The last Ming emperor hanged himself in his garden, and the Manchu people swept in to establish the final great dynasty of Chinese history, the Qing dynasty. The Qing dynasty lasted from 1644 to 1912, nearly 3 centuries. Under early Qing emperors like Kangxi and Qianlong, China reached its largest territorial extent. The empire absorbed Tibet, Taiwan, Mongolia, and vast territories in Central Asia. The population grew to 400 million people. China was the largest and richest empire on Earth. But the world was changing. While China turned inward, Europe was undergoing extraordinary transformations. The scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, new navies, new weapons, new ideas about trade and empire. By the time European powers began arriving on China's coast in force, the British, the French, the Dutch, China found itself facing something it did not understand and could not easily defeat. The Opium Wars of the 1840s were a catastrophe for China. British merchants had been selling opium to Chinese people, creating widespread addiction. When the Chinese government tried to stop the trade, Britain went to war and won. China was forced to sign humiliating treaties. Hong Kong was ceded to Britain. Foreign powers were given special rights and privileges in Chinese cities. China, which had once seen itself as the center of the civilized world, the Middle Kingdom, was suddenly exposed as weak and vulnerable. The decades that followed were brutal. The Taiping Rebellion, one of the deadliest civil wars in human history, killing perhaps 20 to 30 million people, tore the country apart. Foreign powers carved out more and more influence. The Boxer Rebellion of 1900, a violent uprising against foreign presence in China, ended in another military defeat and more humiliation. By the early 20th century, the Qing dynasty was dying. In 1911, a revolution finally brought it down. Sun Yat-sen, a visionary revolutionary leader, proclaimed the Republic of China. For the first time in over 2,000 years, China had no emperor. But the new republic was fragile. Warlords fought each other for control. Japan invaded and occupied huge parts of China. A brutal civil war erupted between the nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the communists, led by Mao Zedong. Japan's full-scale invasion in 1937 brought years of horrifying violence and atrocities, including the Nanjing Massacre, which shocked the world. After World War II ended in 1945, the Civil War resumed. And in 1949, Mao Zedong's communist forces emerged victorious. On October 1, 1949, Mao stood in Tiananmen Square in Beijing and announced the founding of the People's Republic of China. China, after a century of humiliation and suffering, was, in Mao's words, standing up. The decades that followed under Mao were filled with both hope and tragedy. The Great Leap Forward, an attempt to rapidly industrialize China, led to one of the worst famines in human history, killing millions. The Cultural Revolution, a movement to destroy old traditions and enforce strict communist ideology, brought 10 years of chaos, violence, and destruction of irreplaceable cultural heritage. But after Mao's death in 1976, a new leader emerged, Deng Xiaoping. Deng made a bold decision. He opened China's economy to market forces while maintaining Communist Party political control. He created special economic zones where foreign companies could invest. He sent Chinese students abroad to study science and technology. He famously said, "It does not matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice." And the cat caught mice. Over the next 40 years, China experienced the fastest economic growth of any large country in human history. Hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of poverty. Cities transformed from small towns to gleaming megacities. China became the world's factory, then the world's technology competitor, and today, a global superpower. The story of China is still being written, my friends. It is a story that is 5,000 years old and still very much alive. It is a story of dynasties rising and falling, of ideas and inventions that changed the world, of suffering and resilience, of ancient traditions and modern ambitions. And you have just heard it in English. Take a moment to feel proud of yourself. You followed this story from the Yellow River to modern Beijing, from the first farmers to the Forbidden City, from Confucius to Mao. You listened, you learned, and you grew both in history and in English. That is what DreamLearn English is all about, learning language through stories that matter. If this video helped you, please like it, share it with a friend who is learning English, and subscribe to DreamLearn English so you never miss a story. Leave a comment below and tell me which part of China's history did you find most interesting. I would love to hear from you. Thank you for being here today, my friends. Keep learning, keep growing, and I will see you in the next story.